So the Initiative for Equal Rights is an organization in Nigeria, and this organization has been existing for 20 years. Yes, TEARS is 20 years this year. And this organization, TEARS is an organization that was it was founded based on the principles of human rights, principles of justice, inclusivity, and diversity. And 20 years ago, there was this urgent need, to rally around, to program around healthcare, health for marginalized communities, and also the protection of human rights for marginalized communities. So TEARS took up that mantle to be like a beacon of hope, a beacon of justice for Nigerians, a beacon and an organization that protects the human rights of Nigerians, every Nigerian, and especially sexual and gender minorities. So for the past 20 years, TEARS has, built capacity of community and organization. TEARS has mentored organizations, sister organizations, both within Nigeria and outside of Nigeria, especially in the West African region. TEARS has worked in collaboration with government agencies and institutions to ensure that protection of lives and properties of Nigerians and especially LGBTQI persons is achieved. So this is a brief summary, a very, very, very brief summary of the work that we do at TEARS. And to round it off, I will say that we do this work through different thematic areas. We do this through strategic litigation. We do this through economic empowerment. We do this through capacity building, not just for, community, not just for individuals within the community, but for other institutions who need capacity building in terms of inclusivity and inclusive human rights advocacy. We also do a lot of work in terms of research and knowledge management, and we do a lot of work in terms of narrative change, trying to inject the real realities of things and visions of queer people into media to, own the narrative and ensure that the accurate representation is put forward. So that is a summary of the work that TEARS does. And I will hand over now to Afolabi Ayela to take us for the keynote speech for today. Thank you once again, everyone. Thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Uma. Can everybody hear me? Let me just be sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, want to use this opportunity to welcome everyone again. It's truly an honor and a privilege to welcome everyone to this important conversation hosted by us, the Initiative for Equal Rights, TEARS, in commemoration of Pride Month. So happy Pride to everyone. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each of you, advocates, donors, community leaders, allies, and, change makers, for your presence, your commitment, and your ongoing resistance. On the theme today, funding resistance, rethinking funding for queer movements in Africa. This could not be more timely and, urgent. As many of us are, accurately aware, 2025, has brought seismic shifts in the global funding landscape. Several donor governments, once pivotal in supporting queer rights, have withdrawn their overseas development assistance, redirecting resources to other national priorities, while simultaneously advancing or enabling transphobic and homophobic agendas. We have witnessed damaging legal decisions and a resurgence of far-right movements that are systematically chipping away at hard-won victories. In our local context, the important work that we do as, queer civil society, the impact to this work has been profound. Traditional funding streams are rapidly shrinking, leading to the loss of critical roles and the deliberate obstruction of access to life-saving medication. And yet, our communities, our needs, and the work that we do has not lessened. On the contrary, they have grown even more urgent, more visible, and more indispensable than ever before. But here is the truth that we must hold on to. Where communities in Africa have never depended solely on external validation or external resources for their survival, we have always organized, sorry, we have always resisted, we have always created space for ourselves where there was none. And so this movement demands that we reimagine not only where our funding comes from, but how we think about sustainability, solidarity, and strategy. This is the time for collaborative innovation, not just across borders, but across sectors, movements, and identities. We must look inward and ask ourselves, times like this, we must also ask ourselves how we can support ourselves within our local and regional context. How can we deepen partnerships amongst community-based organizations to avoid, the issues that we're facing now? I'm wondering if, we can still hear and see me.
Yes, we can still hear you. It's breaking, but we can still hear you.
Yeah, it's the network, sorry. So how can we mobilize local resources, knowledge, and talent in ways that create value and by the communities that we serve, How can we create value for them? We must begin to interrogate and invest in alternative and locally rooted funding models, whether through social enterprise, ethical partnerships, mutual aid networks, and regional giving ecosystems. Many of our organizations, including ours, TIERS, we have a long-standing history of delivering community-led health services, mobilizing regional solidarity in times of crisis and positioning ourselves as trusted voices in both national and global spaces. These assets are not just programmatic, they are strategic. At TIERS, we are committed to exploring these questions in practice, not only out of necessity, but out of a deep belief in the creativity, resilience, and brilliance of Nigerian and the African queer movements. We know that funding resistance means understanding funding not just as money, but as trust, autonomy, strategy, and imagination. Today, I invite all of us to think beyond the scarcity mindsets. The question is not simply, where will the next grant come from? The question should be, what kind of movements do we want to build, and how can we resource that vision together on our own terms? My hope is that the conversation we engage in today will reignite our collaborative imagination and strengthen our commitment to purposeful collaboration. Collaboration that is not only strategic, but essential for our sustainability and survival, because only together can we sustain this work, safeguard our communities, and forge a future rooted in justice, dignity, and hope. So once again, I want to say thank you all for being here. Happy Pride Month again, and may our collective resistance continue to flourish. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Afolabi. Thank you for that beautiful keynote speech. And like you said, there's something you said that resonated with me. It's not about where will the next fund they come from, is how we can come together and organize to find alternative ways to make sure that we sustain our movement and the work that we do. And basically just ensure that the lives of everyone is equally protected, and not just human rights for some, but human rights for all. Thank you so much. And we'll be moving on to the next thing for our agenda today. And we have a panel discussion on the next thing on our agenda. And for this panel discussion, we want to, we want to discuss the funding challenges. Since January, it's been, for a lot of people, it's been mayhem. For a lot of organizations, it's been confusion. A lot of people have been laid off. A lot of people have had to stop the work they are doing. But most importantly, a lot of people have been unable to access life-saving medication as a result of, the stop work order, and then its subsequent continuation, and then exclusion. A lot of things has happened for the community, and not just these things. We also have the increasing shrinking of funding within civil society space. So right now we are grappling with, all of these issues at the same time. So for this panel, we want to discuss, what funding resistance looks like and how we can rethink funding for our queer movement in Africa. And with me today for this panel is I have Aisha Shabu Lenore. I hope I try to pronounce your name well, because I might get it wrong, but please don't be offended. When I know that when you speak, you can, let me know how to correctly pronounce the names. I don't know, can everyone still hear me and see me? Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can
Or
hear
can
you.
you see me?
Yes.
We can also see you.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to introduce Aisha. Aisha is a queer entrepreneur dedicated to building inclusive, social justice-driven communities through travel, spaces, and advocacy. She is the director at the Common Press, London Square Intersectional Bookshop Cafe. She is also the founder and the award-winning LGBTQI travel company, um, called Moonlight Experiences, and she's also a Give Out trustee. Aisha's work is rooted in equity and is focused on creating resources globally for queer and Black and people of color and persons of colors. Um, their voices, to ensure that their voices thrive culturally, socially, and economically. Let's give a round of applause for Aisha. Thank you for joining us and for accepting our invitation. We're looking forward to having a beautiful and fruitful conversation with you. The next person on the panel for today is Ebenezer Piga, pronouns he, him, hers. Ebenezer is a committed human rights activist and community organizer with over a decade of experience advocating for the rights of sexual and gender minorities in Ghana as executive director of Ratify Ghana, a leading LGBTQI-led nonprofit organization. He has been at the forefront of national and regional efforts to promote equality, justice, and dignity for marginalized communities. Ebenezer's leadership and impact has been recognized both locally and internationally, and in 2023, he was invited to join the Meta Africa Advisory Council, offering strategic guidance on LGBTQI inclusion across the continent. In 2024, he was honored with the U.S. Department of State's Human Rights Defenders Award, a prestigious recognition of his courage and contribution to advancing human rights in Ghana. Let's all welcome Eben to this conversation. Hello, Eben. Just say hi or clap. Okay, I can see that. Thank you for joining us. Looking forward to having a beautiful conversation. The last panelist, and not the least by any means, today is Michael Essien. Michael Essien is a HIV lead for Lagos State AIDS Control Agency, called also known as LSACA. Michael Essien has experience working with over 400 non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations, as well as organized private sector, government research institutes like the Nigerian Institute for Medical Research, places like networks like state networks and international partners like UNICEF, USAID, UKAID, UNIT, etc. Michael Essien is passionate about project management, and he has 16 years of experience in development practice, and he is focused on design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluating development programs. Please let's all welcome Michael to this conversation. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for accepting our invitation and being here for this discussion. So like I mentioned earlier, my name is Chimdima Ike. I'm an intersectional feminist and I'm director of programs at Tears. And I'll be your moderator for this panel discussion today. So my first question is to Michael. Michael, let's just do a quick mic check. Please, if you can speak, just say hi. Hi, Aisha, can you hear me? And is your mic working? Can you speak?
Yeah. Hello. Hi, check.
Okay. Hi, mic check. Hi, Michael. Hi, Eben. Can we do a quick mic check before we go ahead?
Hi, happy Pride, everyone.
Hi, happy Pride, Eben. Hi, Michael. Can we do a quick mic check? I think you are unmuted, but I do not think we can hear you. Can anyone hear Michael speaking? No.
No.
Okay, I'm guessing that the technical team is going to be working on that. So we are just going to go ahead with, questions for other panelists. Eben, when we talk about this, funding issue and what has happened, shrinking of, the shrinking of funding, and how there are a lot of alternative strategies to be devised to accommodate and get in touch with the reality on ground. I know that working in Ghana and also seeing how funding also affects the way in which you can be responsive and responsive to anti-right actors, and how they have, will I say, some sort of influence in, the parliament. Months ago, or will I say a year ago, there was like talks around the family values bill. That did not obviously, get passed, but there's still conversations and talks around that. And we know that, a lot of the work we do as activists and as advocates on the ground involves and needs a lot of resources to ensure that we are actively ready and responsive to issues when it comes to rolling back of rights for LGBTQI people and other marginalized groups. So I want to ask you now, from your experience in Ghana, how has the shrinking of funding, how has that affected, Ghana and the work you do in terms of, the rolling back of rights when it comes to LGBTQI rights and advocacy in Ghana? What is the linkage between that shrinking of funding and the work that you are doing on the ground, and also the work in challenging the rollback of rights for LGBTQI people?
All right. Thank you, and happy Pride again. And thank you for the opportunity. So the funding cuts that has the global movement has seen has actually affected organizations and mobilizing the movements in Ghana, I believe also in Nigeria and other parts of Africa, including West Africa at large. So what happened was that after the some time after the announcement, you would hear or see in your emails that there have been some suspension or halting of activities and all of these things. So it affected organizations that had already planned some activities because of some grants they had already signed agreement for. So it has affected, and I would want to highlight something. So currently in Ghana, as you mentioned, that there's a bill that we are battling in Parliament, and that bill was first introduced in 2021, but did not get presidential assent after it was passed in February 2024. So now we have a new administration, a new parliament, but the bill has been reintroduced. However, after it was first introduced in 2021, I remember that there were 3 international organizations that came to Ghana to carry out an assessment. So there was Stefano from Senegia and also Sibongile from ESLA and Wendy Isaac from Human Rights Watch. Then in part of the assessments, there were 3 outcomes: that the movement was young, most of the leaders were inexperienced, especially to be able to push back against such an attack in form of a legislation. And also the other part was that Ghana has been heavily underfunded. That was in 2021. So you can imagine from that background, if we are seeing a cut in funding, then the movement is going to be impacted a lot by such such an outcome of funding cuts. So it has affected organizations, and already we were trying to respond and countering the bill and also countering anti-LGBT movements in Ghana and also responding to emergency cases that were coming. So in Ghana, in 2023, for example, at my organization, we documented about 106 human rights violations. In 2024, we had about 3 times. So there were about 300 cases that we were able to document. And from that, we saw a rise also in requests for emergency supports. And these things in the beginning of this year, because of the funding cuts, the emergency support have shrinked. So even though the cases are rising and more emergency cases are coming, we have not been able to respond to the number of emergency cases that are coming. Meanwhile, we are still experiencing an attack. So it has actually affected capacity building of human rights defenders, operations of organizations, some activities have been put on hold, and also it has affected our ability or capacity to respond to emergency responses. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that, Eben. And what you just said was very eye-opening, especially when you put it into context. You said in 2023, 106 cases, human rights violations recorded, and then in 2024 you have about 300. That's like it tripled. And also, you mentioned something that really, stood out. You said even at 2021, Ghana, the movement in Ghana was not heavily funded. And now with the funding cuts, it's even worse. And it brings us to, the conversation around, there are countries even in West Africa that oftentimes, maybe overlooked because of their size and because of the movement is quite young. Like you said, the movement is quite young in Ghana. When you look at 10, 15 years ago, that was when, the movement started growing and, sprouting. And there is need for a lot of, capacity building, a lot of resource, a lot of technical know-how to go into, working with the community in Ghana to ensure response to, these rollbacks of rights that is, happening. But I wanted to also highlight something. So a lot of time when we talk about, LGBTQI rights, a lot of people have different opinions on what they think. In Nigeria, and you hear people say things like, oh, we are saying LGBTQI rights, you are looking for preferential treatment because, or as an average Nigerian, what about my human rights? I do not even understand what it is like to be protected by the government. And what we say to these people, when you put it into perspective, if you as a non-queer person, you are facing certain challenges, if you are even finding it difficult to ensure that you attain and enjoy your human right, what more a marginalized group, a group of people that are in the minority, a group of people that have been left in the margins, that means is multi-dimensional. In Nigeria, you say something like double jeopardy, like, we are having it even worse off. And when we talk about human rights for LGBTQI people, it's basically the basics. We are talking about socioeconomic empowerment. We have a group of people whereby they are being excluded from going to school. And it seems like it's what people are just saying. But when you look at the stats, you see that most young people who their parents find out to be queer, get thrown out. They stop going to school. If you cannot go to school, if you cannot fend for yourself, if you cannot learn a skill, you cannot actually provide for yourself. You cannot be economically empowered. And that's why you see a large number of queer people needing access to emergency funding, because, and this funding is for basic needs. It's for just a meal a day. It's for getting somewhere to sleep. It's for getting transportation to access HIV medication for those who are living with HIV. And you see, when you put all of these into perspective with the current situation with the funding cuts, we see that there's a huge gap, there's a big issue that is brewing that we need to, immediately respond to. So my next question, I just want to follow on what you just said, Iben. I want to ask you, have there been like alternative strategies that you all are using in Ghana to address the needs of the communities? You said something about there's a rise in the request for emergency funding, and there's a big need. The capacity is low. There's need to, there's a need for resources. What are the alternative strategies and measures that you guys are currently working on or looking to work in, so that we can all share lessons and take home with us, and also, have anything, if we have anything to add, we can also share on that. So what are these lessons on alternative strategies that you all are taken into consideration in Ghana at the moment?
All right, thank you. So currently, what we are doing is that so in 2023, partners came together, and when I say partners, some queer organizations and also some mainstream human rights organizations came together and then partnered with some UN agencies to form what was then called the Rapid Response System. So it was more like a network of organizations, but mainly queer organizations supported by about two mainstream human rights organizations to form that network to respond to sexual and gender-based violence, where they would partner with the UN agencies to find resources. Then they would bring the resources to support emergency cases received by queer organizations. So that has actually worked because I think it's one of the first ever community focused kind of emergency response. Most of the emergency response was like for human rights defenders or frontliners, but this one focused on supporting grassroots people, where people that needed relocation support to receive some relocation support, and if they needed medical or legal aid, we would then fall on organizations that have that kind of capacities or that have such partnerships to be able to respond or support these survivors. So that has been something that has been there, and it has currently been working in a way. And it started when there wasn't any funding cuts, but um, this year it has delayed, but I was just told recently that it's starting again. And there's even a meeting this week that is going to continue implementing that program. And I believe this is something that would continue to work. And that also shows some kind of intersectional advocacy, because I believe that those partners did not go for that funding specifically for to support our community. However, the intersectionality of gender-based violence was able to do some kind of advocacy for us to be able to receive such support from those agencies. Yeah, I think that's something that has worked. And I think also one thing that has also worked when it comes to advocacy with the bill in Ghana is how we form coalitions and network to put resources together to be able to respond to the attack from the anti-LGBT, anti-right, anti-gender, and then also the bill itself, where groups have come together to be able to put forward a legal challenge, some kind of advocacy activities is being done collectively and in form of coalitions where resources and experiences and capacities are being brought together. Yeah, so this is something that I would like to highlight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eben, for that was really enlightening, and that's a good one because what I'm learning is that putting into perspective the intersection of human rights, and because when you talk about gender-based violence, people tend to look at it narrowly, but entering into that space and broadening what it means like and what it is when you talk about gender-based violence, and talking about like diverse gender identities, sexual orientation, and that was like a good thing to tap into. And the mention about it starting even before the funding cuts, and we can see how intentionally positioning the work that we do, looking at it holistically and intersectionally, it's the way to sustainability, because even in recent time with the funding cuts, it is that particular strategy that is paving the way for the reality on ground right now. And that is so interesting and beautiful to see. Thank you so much for that, Eben. I'll be coming back to you later, but I'll be moving now to Aisha. Hi, Aisha. By the way, I love your hair.
Thank you.
So I want to ask. So as a Black person, and also a Black person who is currently living in, somewhere I would say is the Western world, people born north, right? And you have connections with not just the community in where you currently reside in, but there are connections with other community that exist within Africa, right? I wanted to ask is, can you tell us, and also this is as someone who sits on the board of an organization that is a funding organization, and your experiences and realities as a queer person, as a Black person, I want to ask that, can you share with us, you tell us some ways that, funders can make funding more accessible to queer movement, especially those in Africa, in West Africa, also leading from some of the challenges that Eben has mentioned, and considering the time right now of the funding cuts, what ways can you share with us? What strategies can we imbibe and take in on how we can get access to, funders and funding, especially for fair movements? I don't know if that question was clear, or do you want me to go again?
No, all good. No, thank you for that question. I'll be able to kind of go through and discuss a little bit about how funders can make it more accessible. I'm Aisha Shaibulanoir. One of the trustees at Give Out. I'm based in the UK. I was born in London, but I actually grew up in Nigeria. I grew up in Jos. So I'm a Hausa girl, and my family are also from Ghana. So it's great to be talking about how we can, I guess, fund more countries in West Africa, fund more countries in West Africa, but also the things that we can do, especially now that we're seeing these kind of DEI rollbacks all across the world, but also seeing governments take away funding. I'll go through to talk about first a little bit about Give Out and how they've been supporting especially organizations in the global south, and the aims and how also how they support long term. So Give Out is a international LGBTQ community foundation based here in the UK. So what we do is we actually mobilize resources from our community and allies, and we channel them to the front line of LGBTQI organizations, particularly in the global south. So such as Tears and many other organizations that we have funded and supported. And the idea is to advance queer rights in these countries, ensure dignity and also freedom. Similar to what both of you were saying earlier, is having the resources so that you are able to do the work that you already do, and to be able to develop new ideas for basic kind of day-to-day things and basic human rights such as healthcare and employment and all of these things that we talk about. In doing this, the idea is Give Out kind of fills in that gap that exists between getting resources and having kind of your radical vision that you've been all trying to implement for Tears over 20 years now. And Give Out does this in different ways. You were talking about, I guess, responses and how you can also provide support when there's a crisis. So because of all of these kind of US funding cuts that have been happening, there's different ways in which Give Out like, okay, what else can we do outside of like the general giving? So there is also like this need to call for action, to create like emergency funding and to create urgent funds. We've seen that at least $100 million in donor government funding has been taken away from the Global South. I mean, this has put loads of services at risk, so many projects at risk, and so many people's lives at risk. So I would say so far, 2/3 of Give Out grant partners have already seen these cuts. Some of the programs had to end and close. Staff have to be laid off. So many. This now is created this issue surrounding like uncertainty and instability. And so one of the things that Giver has done now in response to this is the launch of the LGBTQIA Urgent Response Fund. So this is all about giving emergency flexible grants to partners in Iraq, Lebanon, Nigeria, Jamaica, El Salvador, and all across the world where it's going to be needed. It hasn't filled the gap in terms of what people has lost, but I think it's about providing that little bit of breathing room in order for some of the partners that we work with to get to still keep their staff, to still keep some of that knowledge that the institutions have, and whilst they look for alternative funding. And I think at a time like this, there's a lot that funders can do. It's really imperative to make the funding that goes into these African movements very accessible. There's a lot of research that you can see that has been done from other partners such as the Global Philanthropy Project, Kaleidoscope Trust, Outright International. So many other people have actually showcased that there needs to be a difference in terms of how we give. And one of the ways is making things far more flexible and having like core funding and multi-year funding rather than like a one-off, or which, I think you can do both, but this idea of long-term core funding makes a bigger difference because it allows organizations to be able to plan better, to strategize better, and to be able to ensure that their impact lasts that much longer. That long-term security is about investment and giving support so that you can build infrastructure and in return that resilience. So I think it is important that funders prioritize multi-year grants with also lighter admin and lighter reporting because we want organizations to focus on the work that they're doing rather to be bogged down behind like all the admin and all the things that, slows down, I guess, change and progress. We see it a lot here in the UK. Funding streams work the same way, so much that the amount of bureaucracy that you have just puts people off, and the people then that need that funding end up missing out. The other way also that funders can support, I guess, and organizations is working on, I guess, building local ownerships and infrastructure. I would say this is an issue we see in the UK as well, where a lot of grassroots organizations aren't able to own certain things. And I say this about property, finding ways of sustainability and safety, and investing in like real estate and that would really help with long-term autonomy as well. One of the things we can draw here is with the LGBTQ spaces that we have all across the world, wherever you are, you constantly hear queer spaces are closing, and I'm talking about being able to even have office space that, an organization owns, being able, if you are in a country where you can build LGBTQ centers, not just having LGBTQ centers in buildings where you are having to bend to the will of a particular landlord, but being able to own and have that autonomy is so important. And I think building that into the African movement needs to be there as a long-term strategy. And, when you purchase your own space, we see that it really dramatically decreases that insecurity that you may have. And then it means that when there are cuts that happen, then it gives you a much better stability to kind of change and evolve in different ways. The other thing is being able to simplify application processes. So funders, I think, sometimes feel that more questions, more hoops means greater, I would say, greater control into who they're giving the money to. But actually, it shouldn't be about control. It shouldn't about having people jump hoops. It's about the fact that when people do that, they make it very inaccessible. The same with language, complicating forms when they don't need to be. I think that's something that we see all the time. And then in areas where you are working with groups in a country where English isn't the first language, I think it's also important to provide translation, application coaching. And it's so funny that even here, when loads of groups are applying for art funding and different things, they also struggle despite the fact that English is their first language. And it's because the forms can be quite complex. And if you are not used to working as grant writers or having resources where you can get that expertise, it takes a very long time to fill these forms. And sometimes there are things that they're looking for that you completely miss because this is not something you do on your day to day. So it's really important to also have this kind of transparency in supporting groups to do the application correctly so that they get the best chance, putting it very simply so that they know what you are looking for, because often organizations do those work, but it doesn't get translated across on the application forms. And that goes with reducing any extra orders, legal burdens, so that actually more organizations that may not be registered or they might have certain issues can still have access to that funding if they are also doing that work. And then funding beyond the visibility, I think when we talk about pride, there's several ways in which we can invest in our community and in like the African movement. There's things that you don't see, such as mental health, putting in grants and funding for mental health, legal aid as well. This is something that we know a lot of countries in Africa require. Legal aid is quite important because then when it's needed, we've been talking today about what's going on in Ghana, having legal aid, it's going to make such a big difference in that fight. Mutual aid and crisis response, as well as movement building that is often invisible but essential. I think is for people to recognize that if you follow kind of these 3 to 4 steps, that will definitely make it more accessible um, for partners in the global south.
Are you still speaking?
No, I'm all done now.
That's a beautiful one, and it's as if like for Christians, it says the Bible, right? Because some of the things you mentioned, really stood out in terms of when it comes to simplifying reporting and applications. So you find out funders, they do want to fund, and they have funders put out these calls, and they come into countries and regions and say they want to fund those on the grassroots, but oftentimes fail to realize that those on the grassroots are working rapidly. They need to act fast, and a lot of people on the grassroots do not have, like you mentioned, dedicated grant writers or resource mobilization persons. And you find out that, most of these restrictive application processes that are put up by funders are, it's usually, when you say it's through a lens of their own reality. So a funding organization is obviously well established, has dedicated grant writers, has all of this expertise, and oftentimes fail to realize that, those are the grant at the grassroots level, those in country that they want to support would not be as established as they are, and oftentimes fail to localize their funding processes and application to that context. And it's very important that you mentioned it. And I'm happy that I'm increasingly hearing this, conversation from funders. And shout out to Give Out. I can personally say that Give Out practices what it preaches, right? In terms of, reporting, you find that you have projects, important projects that need to be implemented. You need to connect to the community. Those are the grassroots. You need to give support. But if all of that time is going into writing reports, into, all of this, there was a time it was like we were only writing reports here and hardly even have time to, implement. And as a result, sometimes you miss the deadlines for the reporting, and it just creates this chain of, friction. And it's great that we are having these conversations. Last year, I think in South Africa, there was this funding summit, and I think Ayan Afolabi happened to join on the last day, and we saw a group of funders, sitting together and discussing how can we make these processes easier. And it's beautiful to hear it coming from a funder who not only believes in this, but is also putting it in practice. And I hope that other funders who are listening in can, take one or two points that has been shared to also optimize in the work that they do. Thank you, Aisha, for that, for highlighting all of that and for those strategies that you have given. I'll be coming back to you, but before I do, I want to quickly, pose this question to Mike and to Michael. Hi, Michael. I don't know if your mic is working now. I hope it is. If it is, just say hi and just do a little bit of introduction. Can you hear me? Or can you say hello? Let's see if your mic is working. I think you're muted. You're still muted. You might need to unmute yourself.
I don't think he's able to unmute himself, actually. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Hi, Malachi. Malachi is is on the back end. Malachi, can you try to unmute Michael? Hi, Michael. Are you unable to unmute yourself? You can just type in the chat box. Let's hear if you are able to unmute yourself. So as we wait for Michael, I just wanted to just say that if we have questions for each of the panelists, we can just, put them down in the chat box. I know that there's a question already in the chat box, and I'm going to, read it out as we go. Apologies, just give me a minute. Let us find out what is going on with Michael's mic. Hi, Michael. Can you try to unmute yourself now? Let's see if it works. Michael, I've been asked to ask you if you are using an earphone or earphones, and maybe that might be the issue. I'm trying to, I don't know if you can still hear me. So I can see that there is no block. So there is a block icon on the mic that says that you cannot unmute, but the block icon is no longer on your mic. So can you try to log back in and unmute yourself? Okay, everyone, I'm so sorry about that technical glitch. Let's just give it a few more seconds as we wait to make sure that Michael is fully present with us. Okay, so as we wait for Michael, I will just, start shooting some of the questions as we, go back and forth. I still have more questions for Aisha and Eben, but I would like to ask a question from Bill USA. Bill, I don't know if your question is directed to anybody in particular, but I will read it out right now. you mentioned what is the state of transparency and accountability on funding LGBTQ advocacy by CSOs in Nigeria and Africa generally. I believe that this is a question that is directed to the general house, especially organizations doing work around LGBTQI advocacy. And to start off, before I, maybe, ask Eben if he would like to also speak from the point of view of Ghana. So for Cheers as an organization that heavily does LGBTQI advocacy in Nigeria and also in parts of West Africa, what accountability looks like is accountability to the community that we serve. So as an organization that has come about to respond to the needs, to protect the rights and, ensure the well-being of the LGBTQI community, we definitely have a responsibility to this community. And what that looks like and transparency looks like is ensuring that we actually consult with the community. Oftentimes, organizations might, in the course of the heat of the moment, devise initiative and strategies for the community. And a whole lot of times, these organizations are working with community because, most of these organizations, the people that work in them are community. But sometimes we fail to realize that even within a community, there are diverse realities, right? And there's always a need to continuously touch base. There are diverse reality in terms of class status, diverse realities in terms of the diversity and diverse identities that exist even within the LGBTQI community. So for an organization like ours, Tears, we always make sure to do a needs assessment of the community. And because we program at a national and regional level, we make sure that whatever we are doing, whatever implementation, whatever solution that we are preferring to address a need or a problem is localized. So for example, if it's an initiative that is supposed to happen in Southeast Nigeria or in Northeast, or in Northwest, or in North Central, how are we carrying along the grassroots organization in that region, the individuals in that region, to say, okay, this implementation, does it look like what you earlier requested for? Does it look like your needs? Is this strategy the strategy that can actually address this issue? So for us, that's what, accountability and transparency, looks like. And also what it also looks like is actually ascertaining, because the work we do in terms of advocacy, a lot of the time you cannot quantify it by number, like the impact in that, but you can see it in the level, the increased well-being of the community that you serve. So it's always important to go back to do an evaluation of all of the work that you do. So for example, at Tears, there's something we do at a national scale in Nigeria. Every 2 years, we do a social perception survey, right? We want to see the impact of the work we are doing. I mentioned that we do a lot of work around narrative change, using the media. We do a whole lot of work around, working with government institutions that have the responsibility to ensure that human rights of all Nigerians are upheld. So we want to see if this work that we have been doing, if the society is feeling it. And a lot of the work that we do, you would not see the immediate returns right now. You will get the outcomes, you get the output, but the long-term impact, again, like he says, is long-term. You get it over time. It accumulates and compounds over time. So every 2 years, this social perception survey, and we do not do this ourselves because we want to also have another voice. We do it with NOI polls. That's Ngozi Okonji Iweala polls. It's an internationally accredited and recognized, firm, and they do a survey across Nigeria to get the impact of the work that we have done in terms of what is the general society's attitude to LGBTQI advocacy, LGBTQI people, to human rights, all of this. And every 2 years, we bring out these findings and compare it to the one we did before. So that way, it kind of like grounds us to see in figurative terms, like the extent and the impact and the shift that is coming about as a result of our work. That's also another way we ensure accountability and transparency, other than ensuring that, the community that we serve actually benefits and, sees the benefits of the work that we are doing. So I want to ask Eben if what I've said cuts it, or if he wants to also give a response to this question. The question is, what is the state of transparency and accountability on funding for LGBTQI advocacy by CSOs in Nigeria and Africa generally? And also, if Aisha wants to also give a response, please, by all means, you can go right after Eben.
All right. I think you said it all. So maybe I don't know if Aisha has something different. Thank you.
No, I think you've kind of pretty much covered it. In terms of give out, we do get the organizations that we work with to send in a report. We do also hear from, I'll say, organizations directly as well in terms of the impact. And when it's possible, there are times where also Give Out members are able to visit and to meet organizations, including some of the people that they work with and support. So on our end, what we want to facilitate is to make sure that everything is easy and accessible, so that organizations, like these two, can just get on with the work that they need to do. And of course, you can't always see the impact of everything, especially when you're talking about long-term advocacy and when you're strategically supporting a country in a different way. So yeah, I think both of them have been doing the things that satisfy us to allow us to carry on giving them funding year after year.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for that. That summarizes it from the funder's perspective point of view. Hi, Michael. I can see that you are in now. So because we are coming to the end of this panel session. So I want to ask you. You work for Lagos State AIDS Control Agency, and LSACA has been doing a lot of work to ensure that Lagos residents have access to life-saving medication and other commodities when it comes to HIV treatment and prevention. And I can also say and also support the good work that LSACA has been doing, and also as partners of LSACA. And however, with the funding cuts that came in, and also the stop work order that happened earlier in the year, it has affected the way in which, implementing partners, HIV clinics, public health facilities has been responding, how these institutions and organizations have been responding to HIV management in general. And considering that, Nigeria, unfortunately, heavily relies on foreign aid for HIV programming. So I wanted to ask you if you could just quickly and briefly share with us how the immediate impact, what the impact of that USAID funding pause, what it did in terms of service delivery, HIV service delivery in Lagos, what the impact was like, and what were the consequences of it all. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you once again for inviting me here, representing the Lagos State Control Agency. So I'll just give a brief on what this waiver cost. So it focused basically on facility-based biomedical HIV care, providing antiretroviral support for those already on medication. However, so of the HIV response, which is the services, were basically excluded. Basically, we did what we did a community HIV service risk matrix recently to highlight the potential consequences of non-funding due to the gaps that the waiver caused. So basically, looking at the services, I think the services affected based on the community perspectives were peer support, condoms, PrEP for APs, mental health and psychosocial support. We also have the STI screening, community engagements, also looking at the KP dropping center. The most of this, the delivery mechanism were of course through the one-stop shop centers and also through community outreach teams. Most of the were that some majority of the outreach programs were halted. And if we look at the potential risk, look at peer support, treatment interruptions, of course, loss to follow up. For condoms and PrEP, we're looking at surge in infections among the high-risk groups. Looking at STI co-infections, also with misdiagnosis, of course, during the community HIV testing process, of course, mainly identifying new HIV cases, and of course, there will be drop in undetected viral transmission. Rising, so for youth and adolescent prevention programs, we also see rising infections amongst adolescent girls and young women, as well as we would have noticed that the for the drop-in centers, basically most of it were either closed or they had reduced hours. So basically, the impact was deeply felt amongst the community service hubs that we have in Lagos. But we are looking at having some actions that are being we are trying to processing, and we are looking at ensuring that at least to support the OSS, looking at providing the HIV test kits, condoms, and of course the HIV self-test kits to fill in the gaps created by these donor shortfalls. And for some time now, we've been trying to have alignment meetings to co-plan around these issues. So I don't know if I'm not sure I have completed, but I guess that's what we've done for now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Essien. Like I like how you highlighted the different communities, especially the OSS that has been, a lot of them affected. You talk about, young adolescent girls. You talk about key population and how this USID pause affected programming in terms of service delivery for these groups of people. And this will then follow my next question about, OSS that you mentioned, and I'm very happy that you mentioned that. When it comes to HIV management, prevention and treatment, um, we know all of the language and we know all the programming that comes into it, and we know of a group of people that we call key population. So key population consists of people who are LGBTQI, so mostly MSM, that's men who sleep with men. You have sex workers, you have trans people, you have gay men, then you have persons who use drugs, and and all of the groups that fall under the KP. And when you talk about one-stop shop, a lot of one-stop shop were set up in order to close up the gap in access to HIV medication for these groups of people. Why? Because there's the bias, there's the stigma that these groups of people face when accessing healthcare in public or even private health facilities. And as a way to curb or as a way to solve that issue, one-stop shops were set up, led by the community, for the community, and LSACA, NACA, USID, everybody was working in unison to ensure that service delivery is provided. Now, as you've mentioned, with this court, we are seeing that the OSS have been paused, some have stopped in total. And you did mention that, LSACA, as a way to support during this time, provided some OSS, especially, obviously those in Lagos State, with consumables and condoms, lubricants, and some of these other commodities needed. My question now is, at a long-term basis, or let's say medium term, other than commodities like condoms and lubricants, in terms of ARTs, are there any plans? Like what can LSACA say, based on your knowledge and the work you do, is going to be the fate of this OSS going forward?
Sorry, I think my line went off. I think you need to repeat the question again.
Okay, so I was saying that you mentioned the OSS, and we both know that these OSS are community centers and one-stop shops run by community for community. And you also mentioned what the USID courts, how it affected this OSS, and how LSACA has been supporting them. So I was saying, other than the commodity. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. So I was asking, what do you think, based as someone that works in LSACA, is going to be the fate in the medium term, the fate of OSS in Lagos State? So what's going to be the fate? I know that for the time being, LSACA is trying to support with condoms, lubricants, but what do you think is going to be the fate of OSS going forward? And also, does LSACA as an institution have any particular plans for OSS going forward, and other than the lubricants and condoms that Osaka is currently supporting with? I don't know if you heard that question.
Yes, the question is what is our plan for the OSS and
Yes.
further support? Or
Yes.
am I correct? Further support that
Yes,
we
please.
intend.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, so basically for the OSS, each component, I don't know, maybe I mentioned it earlier. Well, I might not have. The communities are not, community players are not side players, basically. They are the lifeline of response. So definitely the Lagos State is control agency that coordinates the multi-sectoral response knows that we recognize the community based on that. And of course, we are also pushing that the community response basically will continue. That's through the OSS. We are advocating that it remains. We are currently developing long-term plans, medium-term plans with various. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can still hear you. Yes, please go ahead.
We are currently developing long-term plans with the various stakeholders in the state to see how we can ensure, for instance, domestic resource mobilization, and also looking at the public-private partnership to improve on sustaining the response. The way it goes, we are trying to build funding resilience and building funding resilience to ensure that we are at the steering wheel of the response. And that is to ensure that everyone takes ownership of the local response. That's what we are looking at. And that's what our plan focuses on. And based on this, we are looking at ensuring that, like I earlier said, domestic resource mobilization to ensure funding is available, looking at also how we are able to diversify our funding sources or thereabout, and also of the programs. The OSS, other community structures on ground are all part of that plan. It's ongoing, even as we speak right now. It's an ongoing process. We are still trying to bring out an overall, trying to get an overall picture of how things are so that we can see what we need to do. So it's still, I should just say, things that are still ongoing. I'll just put it out.
All right. Thank you for that response. It's really heartwarming to hear that Osaka is actually thinking of still working with OSS, recognizing community, and working on a plan currently to ensure the sustainability of community work and action. And TS can attest to the fact through our TS clinic that is registered by other HEFAMA that Osaka has been supporting the clinic with consumables, condoms, lubricants, and we are looking forward to the ones that come for ART. So we especially thank Osaka for timely intervention and looking at sustainable ways to ensure that the work keeps going. So we are rounding up for the panel discussion. We are already far behind schedule. I apologize because of the technical glitches. As we round up with the panelists, please, all those tuned in, please, can you put your name or your organization in the chat box so that when we close up this webinar, we would give you a shout out. To my panelists, Aisha, Eben, and Michael, Thank you so much for being here. I have one question I want to ask to both of you. Just quick wrap up and the same question. So, in a sentence, what is your advice or your take home for everyone on the call? How can we ensure that we continue being resilient even in the midst of funding costs? And what is that one sentence you can give us to ensure or to motivate us to work towards funding resilience and resistance? From your own perspective, from the funder perspective, or from the NGO, nonprofit organization perspective.
All right, thank you. So I'll start. I think we need some kind of rethinking of the whole funding framework where there is sustained, flexible funding. Because as we talk about funding, already funding was very small for core funding, where that were funding that were supporting operations were either so little or was not even there, where organizations would add some kind of core funding to proposals and they will be rejected. So they will be forced to focus on activities or programmatic funding rather than core funding. And there's also a need for regional and diaspora support. And I think we can take the examples of the mobilization for End SARS, for the Gen Z protest. We saw how regional and diaspora support supported these movements to buy water, to buy some supplies for protesters. I think we can also learn from these things. And then also the support for international intersectional. Sorry, please.
Yes, yeah, back.
Am I back now? Okay, then. And there's also some kind of a need for countering the anti-LGBT, anti-gender movement, because our work is getting bigger. We need more funding because of their activities. So we need to continue to counter their work and then urge donors and these international partners to be able to stop them or to do something to stop what they are doing. And I think to donors, I would urge them to support safety and resilience for local organizations. And there's also something that recently came into my mind where there are some international organizations that have offices or they are from Western countries. They work in our communities. They celebrate Pride and all of these things. Where is their social responsibility towards our community here? Because we have gold mines like Newmont and all of these companies, Meta. Where is their support for our organization? So we also need to hold them accountable. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful one, Eben. Aisha, please, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. I mean, to add to that, I think one of the things to consider is to kind of stop that reliance on government aid as well. Government funding is politically volatile in general. And I think looking at different avenues, such as different philanthropists, businesses, and also using the diaspora network. So what we're seeing is there's more and more, I'll say, African Americans wanting to support different and travel to different African countries. African people and Black people in the UK, how we also utilizing our diaspora network to support the movement. I think that is another thing, because a lot of people want to support our queer here, but they don't know how to best do so. So looking at other revenue streams in that way could be really important as well and useful. So Give Out is trying to also mobilize these communities for support and also opening different jurisdictions such as Germany and looking at other countries that could support the cause in this way. And I guess it's diversify and decolonize funding. about just less than 3% of the UK foundation funding actually supports LGBTQIA work internationally. Similar to what you're saying, you know, there are loads of organizations that are in African countries and companies, but yet we don't see them kind of give support in the same way or some form of funding or add to the ecosystem. And I guess also working with kind of African-led kind of organizations that could support with funding, such as the Other Foundation, DIO, UHAI, again, how do we kind of diversify and the portfolio of money coming in? And then acting fast but strategically, seeing how Give Out Urgent Response Fund has actually supported and managed to bring in money. Sometimes when there is an urgency, you are able to build those funds quickly. But although it could be fast, it's just strategizing, building kind of long-term partnerships, building relationships for long-term projects. And I think for my end, it's just to end that, we need to try and resist colonial legacies as well. Like the support that we're getting needs to not be something that we have to rely on. It's something that we can utilize to create our own ecosystem, so that we have more stability. And then I think a lot of funders need to also trust in the community wisdom with the people that are doing this work. And we need to see this shift in power where we are in these kind of if you're working in these LGBTQ organizations in Africa, how do we switch power and support, but also making sure that solidarity isn't seasonal, not just for Pride Month. Being queer is all year long, and it's important that these relationships and these structures that are built is quite deep and happens long term.
Thank you for that beautiful one, Aisha. Michael, what words for funding resistance and sustainability can you give us?
Okay, so thank you. I think just for everyone to try as much as possible to shift towards keying into sustainability frameworks. I will try to do that. The essence is that it will help us to improve our planning. It will help integrate
Hi, Michael. I think we've lost you there. Are you there? Okay, so I'll just...
It's not just a goal, it's a necessity. And I think we should. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you to my panelists. So I will just wrap up all of the nuggets that you have shared to us all for achieving funding resistance. We need to, look into local fundraising. We need to look at other revenue streams. We need to look away from government funding because, like Aisha said, and we all know it's very political. We need to, hold corporates accountable. Yes, they have the colors in June. They attend the parties, just like you have said, but how do they do their CSR? When it comes to CSR, do they forget the community? How can we leverage and tap into that? How can we work with other African funding organizations? How can we ensure that funding is sustainable? And how can we look into sustainable structures in terms of organizing and fundraising? Thank you all Thank you, Aisha. It was wonderful to have you here. Regards to everyone at Give Out. Thank you so much, Eben, for being here. Regards to everyone at Ratify Ghana. And thank you so much, Michael, for being here. Regards to everyone at El Saka. Thank you. So we are moving on to the last thing on our agenda for today. Sitting here and talking about strategies we can employ to ensure sustainability of our funding. It's been enlightening, it's been very welcoming, and it's been educational. I hope that we can take one or two things that we have gotten here from the panel discussion, also from the presentation, on some of the strategies that has worked for us, some of the ones we are deliberating on, and we might take or we might not take depending on our context. We hope that it can work for us all. And we, in the spirit of pride, in the spirit of community, in the spirit of movement building, I hope that we continue to stay resilient and we continue to be sustained in our efforts and in the work that we do. Funding resistance, it's our goal, and funding resistance we will achieve. We have come to the end of today's webinar, and I want to especially thank every single one of you who has joined here, from the panelists who accepted our kind invitation, Aisha from Give Out, Eben from Rectify Ghana, Michael from El Saka. I thank you very much. I thank you to all my colleagues at Tears, and Damola and Malakai, who are at the back end working to sort out technicalities. This would have not, gone all this way without the both of you. And for our guests, I thank you so much for joining. We've had a lot of people log out. But thank you for those who are still on the call and those who left early.